What if I told you that the people who once leaned on you, who called you their anchor, who said they could not imagine their life without you, begin to feel a tremor in their chest the moment you no longer need them back? Not because you announced it, not because you turned away with anger or drama, but because something inside you shifted, something quiet and irreversible, and they felt it without you saying a single word. There is a language beneath language, a communication that happens in the body, in the gaze, in the way presence changes its texture. And when you stop needing someone, when that invisible thread of dependency loosens and falls away, they know. They know before you do, sometimes. They feel the ground beneath the relationship change, and it frightens them in a way they cannot name. This is not about cruelty. It is not about revenge or withdrawal as punishment. It is about something far more subtle and far more true. It is about the moment when you realize that the person you have been holding space for, waiting for, bending yourself around, is no longer the center of your inner world. And that realization does not come with fireworks. It comes with silence. It comes with a kind of exhale, a release. You do not stop caring. You do not stop wishing them well. But the urgency is gone. The need to be seen by them, to be understood by them, to be chosen by them, it dissolves. And in that dissolution, something in you becomes whole again. Carl Jung spoke often about the process of individuation, the lifelong journey toward becoming who you truly are, not who others need you to be. He understood that we spend much of our early life building a persona, a mask we wear to navigate the social world, to gain approval, to belong. And that mask is necessary. It protects us. It helps us survive. But there comes a time, often in the middle of life, sometimes earlier for those who have suffered or reflected deeply, when a mask begins to feel too tight, when the cost of maintaining it becomes greater than the cost of letting it fall. And in that moment, you begin to turn inward. You begin to ask not what others want from you, but what you want from yourself. Not how to be loved, but whether you even recognize the person you have become in the effort to be loved. When you stop needing someone, it is often because you have begun this process. You have started to reclaim parts of yourself that you gave away without realizing it. You have started to notice the patterns, the ways you twisted yourself into shapes that were not yours, the ways you silenced your own voice to make room for theirs. And this noticing is not bitter. It is not resentful. It is simply clear. It is the clarity that comes when the fog lifts and you see the landscape as it actually is, not as you hoped it would be. But here is the strange and painful truth. The moment you stop needing them, they feel it. And often they come back. Not because they suddenly realized your worth. Not because they woke up one day and understood everything you tried to tell them. But because the energy shifted. Because you were no longer leaning toward them. You were standing upright, rooted in your own ground. And that change in your posture, that subtle reclaiming of your own center, it registers in them as loss. They feel the absence of your need, and it creates a vacuum. And into that vacuum rushes a kind of panic, a kind of longing they did not feel when you were right there, open and available and waiting. This is one of the great paradoxes of human relationship. We are drawn to those who do not need us, and we take for granted those who do, not because we are cruel, but because need, when it is too visible, too raw, too constant, repels. It asks too much. It reminds us of our own emptiness, and so we move away from it, often unconsciously. We create distance. We become busy. We lose interest. But when that need disappears, when the person who once reached for us stops reaching, something in us wakes up. We notice them again. We wonder where they went. We feel the space they used to occupy, and suddenly it feels cold. If you have ever experienced this, if you have ever stopped needing someone and watched them suddenly return with attention, with affection, with a kind of urgency that was nowhere to be found when you needed it, you know how disorienting it can be. Because part of you wants to believe that they have changed. Part of you wants to open the door again, to let them back in, to return to the familiar dance. And another part of you, the part that has been growing in the silence, the part that has been learning to stand alone, knows better. That part knows that what they are responding to is not you. It is the loss of your attention. It is the absence of your need. It is the mirror you use to hold up to them, reflecting back their importance, their value, their centrality. And now that mirror is gone, turned inward, and they feel invisible. Jung understood that we do not see each other as we are. We see each other through the lens of projection. We project onto others our own unmet needs, our own fears, our own unconscious material. And when someone stops participating in that projection, when they step out of the role we assign them, it creates a rupture. The person who was once predictable, once available, once eager, is now something else. They are opaque. They are separate. And that separateness, that autonomy, it is both attractive and terrifying, because it reminds us that we are separate too, that we are alone in our own skin, that no amount of closeness can erase the fundamental solitude of being human. You may have spent years trying to be enough for someone, enough to keep their attention, enough to earn their love, enough to make them stay. And in that trying, you lost yourself. Not all at once, not in some dramatic collapse, but slowly, quietly, like water wearing away stone. You learned to read their moods, to anticipate their needs, to shrink or expand, depending on what they could tolerate. You became a mirror, a support, a container for their emotions, their dreams, their fears. And you told yourself that this was love, that this was connection, that this was what it meant to be close to someone. But there is a difference between love and need. There is a difference between connection and enmeshment. Love allows for separateness. It allows for growth. It allows for the other person to be who they are, not who you need them to be. Need, on the other hand, is hungry. It consumes. It demands. It cannot tolerate distance or difference or the quiet space where a person goes to be alone with themselves. And when you're caught in a relationship built on need, whether it is your need or theirs, you are not free. You are bound. You are performing. You are always on stage, always trying to earn the next moment of approval, the next sign that you matter. And then something shifts. Maybe it is a betrayal. Maybe it is a moment of clarity. Maybe it is simply exhaustion. You realize that you cannot keep doing this. You realize that the cost is too high. And so you begin to pull back. Not dramatically, not with announcements or ultimatums, but internally. You begin to turn your attention away from them and toward yourself. You begin to ask what you need, what you want, what you have been ignoring in your effort to keep the peace, to keep them happy, to keep the relationship alive. This turning inward is not selfish. It is necessary. It is the beginning of individuation, the process by which you become a whole person, not a half person waiting for someone else to complete you. Jung believed that we are born whole, but we are fragmented by the demands of family, society, culture. We learn to hide parts of ourselves that are not acceptable. We learn to perform roles that earn us love. And in doing so, we lose contact with our own inner life, our own truth. Individuation is the process of reclaiming that truth. It is the process of integrating the parts of yourself that you have disowned, the shadow and the light, the acceptable and the unacceptable, and learning to live from that integrated place. When you stop needing someone, you are often in the early stages of this process. You are beginning to see that you have been living for their approval, their validation, their presence. And you are beginning to understand that no external source can fill the emptiness inside you. That the love you are seeking, the acceptance you are craving, must first come from within. This is not a popular idea. We live in a culture that tells us that love is something we find outside ourselves, that the right person will make us whole, that connection is the answer to loneliness. And there is truth in that. Connection matters. Relationship matters, but not at the cost of your own soul. When you begin to reclaim your soul, When you begin to live from your own center rather than orbiting around someone else, the people who benefited from your need will feel it, and they will often resist it. Not because they are bad people, not because they do not care about you, but because your needs serve a function in their life. It made them feel important. It made them feel needed. It gave them a role, a purpose, a place to stand. And when you no longer need them in that way, they lose that role. They lose that ground. And they do not know who to be in relation to you anymore. Some people will respond to this by trying to pull you back. They will suddenly become attentive. They will ask what is wrong. They will offer affection, time, promises. They will do the things you once begged them to do, the things that were too much to ask when you were asking. And this can feel like a victory. It can feel like proof that you were right, that they did care, that they just needed to see you pull away to realize your value. But if you are honest with yourself, if you sit quietly and listen to your own inner voice, you will know that this is not about you. It is about them. It is about their discomfort with your absence. It is about their need to restore the balance, to bring you back into orbit, to return things to the way they were. And you have a choice in that moment. You can go back. You can open the door. You can tell yourself that this time will be different, that they have learned, that they understand now. Or you can stay where you are. You can honor the ground you have reclaimed. You can recognize that their sudden attention is not the same as genuine change. That behavior born from fear of loss is not the same as behavior born from love and respect. And you can choose yourself, not in a loud way, not with anger or blame, but quietly, firmly, with the kind of clarity that comes from knowing who you are and what you will no longer tolerate. This choice is not easy, because part of you still wants to be wanted. Part of you still longs for the connection you once had, or thought you had. Part of you wonders if you're being too harsh, too unforgiving, too closed off. And this is where the inner work becomes essential, because you must learn to distinguish between the voice of your true self and the voice of your conditioning. The voice that says you are being selfish is often the voice of a culture that taught you to prioritize others over yourself. The voice that says you should give them another chance is often the voice of fear, the fear of being alone, the fear of being wrong, the fear of missing out on something that might, this time, finally be real. But your true self knows. Your true self feels the difference between a relationship that nourishes you and a relationship that depletes you. Your true self recognizes when someone is responding to you as a whole person and when they're responding to the absence of your need. And if you can learn to listen to that voice, to trust it, to follow it even when it leads you into uncertainty, you will find a kind of freedom that no external relationship can give you. Jung spoke of the self with a capital S, the archetype of wholeness, the inner center that is larger than the ego, larger than the roles we play, larger than the identities we construct. The self is not something we create. It is something we uncover. It is already there, waiting beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the masks, beneath the fear. And the process of individuation is the process of aligning your conscious life with that deeper self. It is the process of becoming who you already are at the deepest level. When you stop needing someone, you are moving closer to that self. You are shedding the dependencies that kept you small, that kept you looking outward for validation, that kept you bound to another person's perception of you. And this shedding is not a rejection of relationship. It is a preparation for real relationship, because real relationship can only happen between two whole people. Two people who are not trying to complete each other, but who are choosing to walk alongside each other, each on their own path, each responsible for their own inner life. But the people who knew you when you were fragmented, when you were needy, when you were trying so hard to be enough, they may not recognize this new version of you. They may not know how to relate to you when you are no longer seeking their approval. And this can be painful, because you may still care for them. You may still wish things could be different. But wishing does not change reality. And reality is that some relationships are built on need. And when the need dissolves, there is nothing left to hold them together. This does not mean that all relationships end when you stop needing someone. Some relationships deepen. Some people are capable of meeting you in your wholeness, of celebrating your growth, of adjusting to the new dynamic. These are the people who are never invested in your smallness. These are the people who love you not because of what you do for them, but because of who you are. And these relationships, when you find them, are worth everything. They are the relationships that reflect your true self back to you, that challenge you to keep growing, that hold space for both your light and your shadow. But many relationships will not survive this shift, and that is okay. It is more than okay. It is necessary, because you cannot grow into your fullness while maintaining connections that require you to stay small. You cannot become who you are meant to be while performing a role that no longer fits. And so you must let go, not with bitterness, not with resentment, but with a kind of sad, clear acceptance. You must honor what was, and you must release what can no longer be. There is a grief in this, a real grief, because even if the relationship was not healthy, even if it was built on need and projection and misunderstanding, it was still a connection. It was still a thread that tied you to another human being. And when that thread breaks, you feel it. You feel the absence. You feel the space where they used to be. And for a while, that space feels empty. It feels cold. It feels like loss. But if you can sit with that grief, if you can let yourself feel it without rushing to fill the space with someone new, something else begins to happen. The space begins to feel less like emptiness and more like openness, less like loss and more like possibility. You begin to notice that you have room to breathe, room to think, room to feel your own feelings without having to manage someone else's. You begin to remember who you were before you learned to twist yourself into shapes that were not yours. You begin to hear your own voice again, the voice that was drowned out by the noise of trying to be enough. And in that quiet, in that solitude, you begin to meet yourself. Not the self you constructed to be loved, not the self you performed to be accepted, but the self that has always been there, waiting. The self that is strange and deep and complicated and real. The self that does not fit into easy categories, that does not conform to social expectations, that does not need to be understood by everyone in order to be valid. Jung called this the process of integrating the shadow, the parts of ourselves that we have repressed or denied because they did not fit the image we wanted to project. The shadow is not evil. It is not bad. It is simply the parts of us that we learned were unacceptable, the anger we were told to suppress, the desire we were taught to be ashamed of, the selfishness we were told was wrong, the neediness we learned to hide. All of these parts are still there, in the unconscious, influencing our behavior in ways we do not recognize. And until we bring them into the light, until we acknowledge them and integrate them, we cannot be whole. When you stop needing someone, you are often confronting your own shadow. You are facing the parts of yourself that you gave away in order to be loved. The parts that said, I want, I need, I matter. And you're learning that those parts are not shameful. They are human. They are real. And they deserve to be honored, not hidden. This is difficult work. It is uncomfortable. It requires you to sit with feelings that you have spent years avoiding. But it is also liberating, because the more you integrate your shadow, the less power it has over you. The less you need to project it onto others. The less you need to seek validation from outside yourself. And as you do this work, as you become more whole, you will notice that the people around you respond differently. Some will be drawn to you in a new way, sensing the depth and authenticity that comes from inner integration. Others will pull away, uncomfortable with your refusal to play the old roles, to meet their projections, to stay small. And you will learn to let them go, not because you do not care, but because you care more about your own integrity than about maintaining connections that require you to betray yourself. This is not easy. It goes against everything we're taught about relationship, about loyalty, about love. We are taught that love means sacrifice, that it means putting others first, that it means staying even when it hurts. And there is some truth in that. Love does require sacrifice. It does require compromise, but not at the cost of your soul, not at the cost of your own wholeness. There is a difference between healthy sacrifice, the kind that comes from generosity and choice, and unhealthy sacrifice, the kind that comes from fear and obligation and the belief that you are not enough as you are. When you stop needing someone, you are learning to make that distinction. You are learning to recognize when you are giving from fullness and when you are giving from emptiness, when you are choosing to be generous and when you're trying to earn love. And this discernment is essential, because without it, you will continue to repeat the same patterns, to enter the same kinds of relationships, to lose yourself in the same ways. The people who feel it when you stop needing them are often the people who benefited most from your lack of boundaries, from your willingness to give more than you received, from your fear of being alone. They may not have been conscious of this. They may not have set out to take advantage of you, but the dynamic was there nonetheless. And when you change the dynamic, when you stop giving from emptiness, when you start honoring your own needs, they feel the loss. They feel the shift, and they respond. Some will respond with anger. They will accuse you of changing, of being selfish, of abandoning them. They will try to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself. And this is a test of your resolve, a test of your commitment to your own growth. Because if you give in to that guilt, if you go back to the old patterns to avoid their anger, you will lose the ground you have gained. You will return to the cage you worked so hard to escape, and it will be even harder to leave the next time. Others will respond with confusion. They will not understand what changed. They will ask what they did wrong. And this is harder, in some ways, than the anger, because they are not attacking you. They are genuinely confused, and part of you will want to explain, to make them understand, to help them see what you see. But you cannot make someone understand something they are not ready to understand. You cannot force someone to see you as you are if they are only capable of seeing you as they need you to be. And so, you must accept that they may never understand, that they may always see your growth as rejection, and you must be okay with that. And some will respond with their own growth. They will feel the shift, and instead of resisting it, they will be curious. They will ask questions. They will reflect on their own patterns. They will begin their own process of individuation. And these are the relationships that have the potential to transform, to deepen, to become something more real and more nourishing than they were before. These are the people who are willing to meet you in your wholeness, who are willing to do their own work, who understand that relationship is not about need, but about choice. But you cannot control how people respond. You can only control your own choices, your own boundaries, your own commitment to your own growth. And this is where the real work is, not in managing other people's reactions, not in trying to make them understand, but in staying true to yourself, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is lonely, even when it feels like you're losing everything. Because here's the truth. When you stop needing someone, you do lose something. You lose the illusion of connection. You lose the comfort of familiarity. You lose the role you played, the identity you constructed around that relationship. But what you gain is so much greater. You gain yourself. You gain your freedom. You gain the possibility of real connection, the kind that is based on truth rather than need, on wholeness rather than fragmentation. Jung believed that the second half of life is about turning inward, about integrating the unconscious, about becoming whole. The first half of life is about building an ego, establishing yourself in the world, finding your place. But the second half, or whenever this process begins for you, is about dismantling the false self, the persona, the mask you wore to survive. It is about asking not what the world wants from you, but what your soul wants from you. Not how to be successful, but how to be real. And this process is lonely. There is no way around that, because it requires you to step away from the collective, from the expectations, from the roles that gave you a sense of belonging. It requires you to stand alone, at least for a while while you figure out who you are when you're not performing, when you're not trying to be enough, when you're not looking for validation from outside yourself. And in that aloneness, you will meet parts of yourself that you have been running from. You will meet your shadow. You will meet your grief. You will meet your anger and your fear and your longing. And you will have to learn to be with all of it, without distraction, without escape, without someone else to make it okay. This is the heart of individuation. This is the descent into the unconscious that Jung spoke of, the journey into the underworld where all the rejected parts of yourself are waiting. And it is terrifying because you do not know what you will find there. You do not know if you will be able to bear it, but you go anyway, because the alternative, staying on the surface, staying in the roles, staying fragmented, is no longer tolerable. The cost is too high, and what you find when you make that descent is not a monster. It is not some dark, evil thing that will destroy you. What you find is yourself, the parts of you that you learn to hide, the parts that are messy and complicated and human, the parts that want and need and feel deeply. And you learn that these parts are not shameful. They are not wrong. They are simply you. And they have been waiting for you to come back, to reclaim them, to bring them into the light. When you stop needing someone, you are beginning this journey. You are turning away from the external world and toward the internal one. You are choosing to face yourself rather than lose yourself in another person. And the people who feel it, who sense that shift, they are responding to the fact that you are no longer available to carry their projections, to fulfill their needs, to play the role they assigned you. And that is okay. That is necessary, because you cannot become whole while carrying the weight of someone else's unconscious material. This does not mean that you become cold or closed off. It does not mean that you stop caring about people or that you retreat into isolation. It means that you learn to relate from a different place, from wholeness rather than need, from choice rather than obligation, from truth rather than performance. And this kind of relating is rare. It is difficult. It requires both people to be doing their own inner work, to be willing to see each other as separate, whole beings rather than as extensions of themselves. And if you cannot find that kind of relating, if the people around you are not capable of meeting you there, then you must be willing to be alone. Not forever, not as a punishment, but for as long as it takes to build a relationship with yourself that is strong enough to withstand the pull of old patterns, the temptation to return to what is familiar, even when it is harmful. You must be willing to sit in the discomfort of solitude, to let it teach you, to let it show you who you are when no one is watching, when no one is asking anything of you, when you have no role to play. And in that solitude, you will begin to hear a voice that has been drowned out for years. The voice of your true self. The voice that knows what you need, what you want, what you are here to do. It is not a loud voice. It does not shout or demand. It whispers. It suggests. It invites. And you must learn to listen to it, to trust it, to follow it even when it leads you away from what is safe, what is known, what is expected. This is the path of individuation. This is the journey toward becoming who you are meant to be. And it is not a straight path. It is not a path with clear markers or guarantees. It is a path that requires you to walk into the unknown, to trust yourself even when you do not have all the answers, to keep going even when you are afraid. But it is the only path that leads to real freedom, the only path that leads to real wholeness, the only path that leads to a life that is truly yours. When you stop needing someone, you are stepping onto that path, and they feel it. They feel the shift in your energy, the change in your presence, the absence of your need. And their response, whatever it is information. It tells you who is willing to meet you in your growth and who is invested in keeping you small. It tells you who loves you for who you are and who loves you for what you do for them. And that information, painful as it may be, is a gift because it allows you to make conscious choices about who you let into your life, who you give your time and energy to, who you allow to influence your sense of self. And you begin to understand that the people who truly love you, who truly see you, will not feel threatened by your growth. They will celebrate it. They will support it. They will give you space to become who you are meant to be, even if it means that the relationship changes, even if it means that you need them less, even if it means that you're no longer the person they first met. Because real love is not about possession. It is not about control. It is about freedom. It is about wanting the other person to be fully themselves, even if that self is different from what you expected, even if that self does not need you in the way you thought they would. And if you can find even one person who loves you like that, who meets you in your wholeness, who is willing to grow alongside you, then you are blessed. Because that kind of love is rare. It is precious. It is the kind of love that reflects the self back to you, that reminds you of who you are, that holds space for all of you, the light and the shadow, the strength and the vulnerability, the clarity and the confusion. But even if you do not find that person, even if you walk this path alone for a long time, you are not lost. You are not broken. You are simply becoming. You are simply shedding the layers that were never yours, the roles that no longer fit, the needs that kept you bound to people who could not see you. And in that shedding, in that letting go, you are making room for something new, something real, something that is aligned with who you truly are. So if you have stopped needing someone, if you have felt that shift inside you, that quiet turning away from external validation and toward internal truth, know that you are not alone. Know that this is a natural part of the process of becoming whole. Know that the discomfort you feel, the grief, the loneliness, the uncertainty, it is all part of the journey. And know that on the other side of this, there's a kind of peace that cannot be taken from you, a kind of clarity that does not depend on anyone else, a kind of freedom that is yours and yours alone. You're not broken. You're not cold. You're not selfish. You're simply learning to stand in your own ground, to honor your own needs, to listen to your own voice. And the people who feel it when you stop needing them, they are responding to the fact that you're no longer available to be their mirror, their container, their source. And that is okay. That is necessary. Because you cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot give what you do not have. And you cannot love anyone else fully until you have learned to love yourself. This is the work. This is the path. This is the quiet, unglamorous, deeply human process of becoming whole. And it is worth it. Every step, every loss, every moment of solitude. Because at the end of it, you will know yourself. You will trust yourself. You will be able to stand alone, not because you have to, but because you can. And from that place of wholeness, you will be able to choose connection, not out of need, but out of love. Not out of fear, but out of freedom. Not because you're incomplete, but because you are whole, and you are choosing to share that wholeness with another whole person. And that, more than anything, is what it means to truly live.